One man became one of the most powerful drug lords in history. His name was Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. His story is one of violence, power, and escape. It is a story that has shaped the modern history of Mexico and the United States. But what if that man had never existed? What if he was never born? This is a counterfactual question. It asks us to imagine a different past. It invites us to explore a world that never was, in order to better understand the world that is. We must be careful with such questions. They can be a powerful tool. They can help us see the deep underlying forces that truly shape history. They can reveal the systems and structures that operate beyond any single individual. But they can also be misleading. They can obscure real causes and lead to simple, incorrect answers. In this exploration, we will try to stay grounded. We will focus on the facts. We will look at the real-world consequences of the drug trade. We will ask how power, markets, and the state might have evolved differently, or perhaps not so differently at all. We want to understand the machinery of the international drug trade. We want to see how it functions. We want to know what makes it so resilient, so adaptable, and so destructive. The absence of one famous figure is our starting point. It is the lens through which we will examine the larger, more complex systems of crime, economics, and politics. We will look at the social harm and the policy effects that have defined this era for millions of people. We begin by looking at the world as it was. Mexico before El Chapo was already a country with deep and persistent problems. Poverty was a fact of life for millions. In many rural towns and remote mountain villages, opportunities were scarce. There were few stable jobs. Farmers struggled to make a living. They often faced low prices for their legal crops, like corn, beans. This economic hardship created a landscape of desperation. It pushed people to seek alternative ways to survive. It made them vulnerable to the promises of illicit economies. The power of the state had its limits. In many regions, the presence of the government was weak. Corruption was also a long-standing problem. It was a corrosive element within institutions. It meant that rules could be bent for those with money or influence. Smuggling was not a new phenomenon. It had a long and storied history along the vast border. A map of Mexico from the 1970s, showing major highways and border crossings into the United States. The border with the United States is more than just a line on a map. It is a zone of transit, of exchange, of opportunity. It has always been porous. For decades, goods and people have moved across it, both legally and illegally. Drugs were already a part of this business. Before the rise of large militarized cartels, smaller organizations were already in place. They trafficked marijuana. They moved heroin. The routes were established. The networks of smugglers and corrupt officials already existed. The market for these drugs was large, and it was growing. In the United States, demand was a powerful engine. Profits were immense, large enough to build empires, buy armies, and challenge the state. The Sinaloa cartel did not appear out of nowhere. It rose from this fertile soil of poverty, corruption, and market demand. It grew from smaller, family-based groups of smugglers. They learned the business from the ground up, building connections and expertise. Over time, groups grew bigger and more sophisticated, accumulating capital. They reinvested profits, equipment, weapons, and contacts inside law enforcement and politics. They learned the logistics of moving massive quantities across borders. Leaders emerged, men who could plan, strategize, and manage a complex global business. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman became one such leader, ambitious, ruthless, and an innovator in trafficking logistics. He had partners and rivals and a vast network of allies, employees, and protectors. If he had never been born, Sinaloa, or something very similar, likely would have risen. The cartel was a network, not a monarchy. It possessed knowledge, routes, and financial resources shaped by unchanged structural conditions. If Joaquin Guzman had never existed, another figure would have eventually taken a leading role. The immense profits of the drug trade create intense competition for leadership. Someone else from his generation, Hector Palma Salazar, Ismael Zambada Garcia, or a rival we do not know. The structure of the market rewards ambition and ruthlessness. Could a different leader have been less violent? It is possible. Some operate like executives, preferring bribery and co-optation to open warfare. This could reduce shocking massacres and public shootouts, violence more targeted, more hidden. El Chapo pioneered tunnels and pushed meth markets. A different boss might have been more conservative. They might have stuck to traditional cocaine and marijuana routes, altering product mix and geography. But the core business, transporting illicit drugs for profit, would remain the same. Cartels are shaped by competition, the state, and market demand. A less aggressive leader might invite attacks or state pressure. The broad strokes of a powerful, violent trafficking organization emerging from Sinaloa seem almost inevitable. We must ask, would violence in Mexico be lower without El Chapo? The answer is not simple. The extreme violence comes from several sources: brutal competition over smuggling routes and territories, repressive state actions as police and military battle traffickers, cartels' own violence to control members and terrorize civilians, conflicts with Juarez, Tijuana, the Zetas, tens of thousands of deaths, captures and escapes shaped cycles of violence and response. Absence alters timelines, not necessarily outcomes. Removing bosses often fractures groups, the Hydra effect, more factions, disputes, and killings. Eliminating a leader may prevent specific wars, but unleash decentralized conflict. As long as routes are valuable and profits enormous, incentives for violence remain. The entire structure of the Mexican drug trade is built on one unshakable foundation: the demand for illicit drugs in the United States. This is the engine that drives the entire supply chain. This principle is more powerful than any single person. The market is the true kingpin. Without El Chapo, other people and routes would fill the vacuum. Smugglers innovate. Caribbean routes, Colombian control lingering longer. New corridors would open through Mexico and Central America. From kilo in the Andes to a gram in the US. The markup is astronomical. Profits buy weapons, corruption, logistics, and absorb seizures. The business becomes too lucrative to abandon. Someone will always take the risk. A world without El Chapo still has suppliers. Names and cities change, the flow continues. Focusing on a single kingpin is like trying to stop a river by removing a single stone. Political corruption is a critical factor that shapes the outcome of the drug war. It is the lubricant that lets the machinery operate smoothly and grow to industrial scale. Networks of corruption were established long before El Chapo became a household name. Police, prosecutors, judges, high-level politicians accused of taking bribes. In exchange, protection, intelligence, impunity. Cartels become embedded, sometimes partners with corrupted elements of the state. One missing boss cannot remove systemic corruption. These systems are resilient. Building accountable institutions takes generations: political will, civil society, and a free press. The money involved can distort entire economies and political systems. Without El Chapo, others would buy the same services. The business continues with a new name. Alternate leaders navigate the same compromised institutions. The deals remain on the table. The shadow of corruption provides the darkness where the trade thrives, regardless of who is in charge. Under El Chapo, Sinaloa became a global corporation. It built alliances and supply chains that stretched worldwide, from production to multiple transit corridors. Products flowed into the US, Europe, Australia, Asia. Cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, fentanyl, patterns set and adapted. If he hadn't, others would try similar moves. The logic of capitalism applies. Disrupt one route, another emerges. Eliminate one supplier, new groups rise. Perhaps CJ&G rises sooner. Perhaps Ndrangheta alliances shift. Details change, names, partners, ports. But globalization marches on. Markets too large, profits too great. The problem is a transnational network, requiring rare international cooperation to fight. For decades, the war on drugs, particularly in the US, has focused on supply-side strategy. Disrupt supply chains and target high-level leaders, the kingpin strategy. Arrests or deaths make dramatic headlines, create a perception of progress. The capture of El Chapo was seen as a monumental achievement, but deeper market dynamics often remain untouched. Remove a leader, disrupt command, and often trigger internal power struggles and violence. Supply dips briefly, then recovers as new routes and methods appear. Scholars argue the strategy can be counterproductive, worsening local instability. When a leader maintaining order is removed, chaos often follows, bringing more bloodshed. Without El Chapo, another face would take the label. The policy would be the same. The war persists, with high costs in lives and resources, headlines without lasting solutions. It is hard to ignore the pattern. In any discussion of cartels and kingpins, we must never forget the victims. The drug trade has a real, devastating human cost: death, addiction, pervasive fear. Families mourn those killed, disappeared, or lost to addiction. Entire towns live under intimidation. Children grow with trauma. The social fabric tears. Without El Chapo, some specific tragedies might change, but victims would remain, driven by poverty, weak institutions, and demand. Militarized responses can bring abuses. Civilians caught in crossfire, eroded trust. This tragic cycle persists regardless of who leads. Do criminals shape history, or does history create them?